Welcome to part 1 of knitting your first sweater. This first sweater series class is based off of the Petite Knit No Frills Sweater. It is our most go-to recommended first time sweater. One of ours, actually. We have a few, but this one we have set up this class series for you to help you along knitting your very first sweater, especially if you don't have a local yarn store to help you to take classes from, etc. So real quick, this first session is going to be about choosing what size pattern you're going to be knitting and testing your gauge. We'll also talk a little bit about the cast on method and working up to starting the Raglans. So first off, you do need to purchase your pattern. It is available on Ravelry. It is the No Frills Sweater by Petite Knit. And on the first page of the pattern, you're going to see sizes. On this particular pattern, she does say extra small, small, medium, etc. Don't necessarily go by that to pick your size. You do want to go by the bust circumference and the suggested ease, which is on the next page. So first they are listed in centimeters, and then you can see the finished bust circumference here. So this is measured with your garment laying flat. It would be fully laid out flat, and then in the round. So for example, you could measure your favorite sweater, and you might have a sweater that you like to wear that's 45 inches around. You may have a bust circumference that's exactly 41 inches. Well, you probably won't want to knit that 41 inch if you measure exactly 41 inches. This pattern is designed, as you can see her wearing it, to have some positive ease, which just means that whatever your measurements are, let's just say you measure 41 inches, then you will not want to knit the 41 inch size. You will want to knit a larger size. So you can see in here that she has designed this sweater, make sure you can see this, to have 6 inches of positive ease. So it means it should be 6 inches larger than your actual chest measurements. So she gives some examples further on down. But so for example, I measure about a 34, 35, depending on the day. So we'll just say 35. So for me, knitting the extra small would give me 39 and 1/4 inch finished, which would give me just under, be basically, let's see, well, depending on the day, about 5 1/4 to 4 1/4 positive ease. So if I wanted to make sure that I have a little extra room, I would then knit the 41, which would be the size small. That would give me closer to 7 inches, 6 inches of positive ease if I am measuring exactly 35. If I'm measuring 34, then that would give me 7 inches of positive ease. So hopefully that makes sense to you. There are other YouTube videos out there on gauge and on choosing proper sizing, and just because this says bust measurement doesn't mean you need to measure your bust. What you want to do is measure the widest part of you. So for some of us that is our bust, for some of us that's our tummy and our waist, like a high waist maybe. For some of us that's our hips. So you know how you like sweaters and sweatshirts like this to fit. Measure some of those laid flat and just double. So if it measures, 30 inches laid flat, underarm to underarm, then that's a 60-inch bust circumference for the finished garment. In almost all of Petite Knit patterns, it will say when it says the bust circumference, that is the finished measurement of the garment. Other patterns may tell you finished circumference and then measured or to fit bust circumference. The to fit is calculating in that positive ease for you, or negative ease, depending on the pattern. So yeah, lay out one of your favorite garments, lay it out flat, see how that fits, measure yourself and see, oh, that has 2 inches of positive ease, that has 10 inches of positive ease. Whatever that does, you can take that and oh, I tend to like things with less positive ease, 2 to 3 inches of positive ease. Well, just because she says 6 doesn't mean you have to have 6. So you could definitely, let's just say you measure all your sweaters and you typically only do 3 inches of positive ease, and your 45 your widest part on your body is 45 inches. Well, then you might want to knit the 47 1/4. That will just give you, just a few inches of positive ease, about 2 1/4, and then you can go from there. Or maybe you're like, no, I definitely want a full 10 inches. Well, then knit the 54. If you need a sweater that is larger than this, in this pattern, the Monday sweater is a great alternative, and it does go up to larger bust sizes. Again, that is going to be bust/chest waist sizes. We just use bust because that's what most people are familiar with in sizing industry. But you can use the Monday pattern, and that's going to be almost identical to this pattern, except with a little bit larger sizing options, and the short rows are done slightly differently. So just bear that in mind if you are choosing that pattern but still following along our tutorial. You may need to reference a few other videos in regards to the short row shaping for that specific pattern rather than the one that we're going to be showing here. So just bear that in mind. So picking out your size is always, of course, the first thing that you want to do. But to follow that and to make sure your finished garment actually measures 41 or 45 or 54 or whatever size you're choosing, you need to make sure that your stitch gauge matches her pattern. If it does not, you won't end up with one of those sizes. It will either be much larger or much smaller than what you are wanting in the pattern. So let's show off some gauges. So this is a 21 stitch gauge with a 21 row gauge in stockinette. She gives a recommended needle size. That is just a recommendation. It's not hard and fast. So I want you to just take that with a grain of salt. That may be the gauge that you do. It may not be the needles that you use. So let's get started on gauge. So you can see here I have 2 gauge swatches. So when I did this pattern, I did 2 different gauge swatches. First off, it's the same yarn. So it's the yarn I want to use for this pattern. It is a yarn very similar to what was called for. In the pattern originally, she actually uses a strand of fingering and a strand of mohair held together. That can be a little fiddly for your first sweater, so we just recommend a DK weight yarn. For our sample, we have chosen to use Scout. It's a fabulous, good high quality yarn at a fairly attainable price point, and it is great hard wearing and fabulous, and also very soft for your skin. So this first swatch I did with the recommended needles. So this was done on a US 6, and it has been washed and blocked. And so by what I mean by washed and blocked, meaning that I knit my gauge swatch, I cast on more stitches because you want it to be larger than 4 inches. So when you're doing this, don't just cast on the 21 stitches that she's calling for. I usually cast on around, well, if she's calling for anywhere from, say, 20 to 25, I'll cast on 30 to 35 just to give myself a little extra, because these edge stitches can get warped, they can get a little out of sorts, and you don't necessarily want to measure edge to edge. You want to pick some of the nice tight or relaxed stitches right in the middle. So I knit this first gauge, and then I washed and blocked it. So by washing and blocking, it means I let it soak in a tub of water with some wool wash. In my preference is to use the Eucalan wool wash. So I put a little bit of that in some room temperature water. Let these soak and bloom for anywhere from at least 1 to 2 hours to overnight. I think these sat overnight. And then just very carefully squeeze them like so. You don't want to wring them or anything like that, but just squeeze the excess water out and then lay them flat on a hard surface to dry. I don't pin them out, I don't stretch them, I don't do anything like that. I just let the fabric just relax and dry, air dry. You can put a fan or like overhead fan on, especially if you live in a very humid climate. That's helpful to help expedite the drying process. But so I have 2 different sizes. So first off, this gauge was using the recommended US 6 needle, but as you can see from my little note here, if we were to measure this for over 4 inches, you can just grab yourself a ruler. I don't have a ruler in front of me right here, but you can get a ruler, you can get a fancy gauge swatch, measuring device, whatever floats your boat. But basically what you are going to be measuring are these little V's. So this is 1 stitch. This is number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. So that is your stitch gauge. This, the column of V's stacked on top of each other, is your row gauge. Again, that's not as important, but you want to be somewhat close to it. It's okay if you're a little above or a little below. Most people rarely get exactly both stitch and row gauge. Stitch gauge is always most important, so just keep that in mind. So this was only 17 stitches. So if I had continued with this US 6, knitting the size that I wanted, this would have ended up being much larger than the size that I would have cast on for. Let's just say for math purposes, I would have cast on the 41 finished circumference. With this 17 stitch gauge, I would have ended up closer to about a 45, 46 inch finished garment. And it would have meant that it's too big for me for the way that I like to wear them, and I would have been disappointed at the end. Conversely, if my stitch gauge was, say, something like 25 stitches for 4 inches, then my sweater would end up being much smaller. So the more stitches you get in that 4 inches, the tighter and smaller the garment will be. The fewer stitches you get in there, the larger it will be from the size that is listed. So I went down 2 needles for me. I went down to a US 4. I tend to knit a little bit loose, so I know that I can get a 21 stitch gauge on a US 4. So I knit that gauge up, and you can see here, it's not quite as long as it should be, but that's okay. So I have my 21 stitch gauge here. I have a really nice fabric that I like, and I have the 21 stitches per 4 inches that is required for the pattern. And then my row gauge happens to be, I believe, I didn't measure this one, I think I'm at 27, so I'm within 1 stitch. It's perfectly fine. In this pattern, along with many of her other patterns, you knit to so many inches in the pattern versus doing so many rows. And so any difference of being a row or 2 off is made up for that with having to knit to so many inches before binding off or doing something else. If it was purely a row-based pattern, then it is more, what's the word I'm looking for? Crucial that you get very close to the row gauge, excuse me. So this is my 21 stitches, so I know that I'm going to knit my body of my garment on a US 4. So again, the only thing that's changing in the pattern is I'm not using her recommended needle size. So I'm going to use a US 4 here, which is going to be a 3.5 millimeter. And then instead of a 2.5 for my ribbing, I'm going to go down to a 1.5 for my ribbing. That's what I'm going to need. You will need to get whatever needle you do for gauge. You do not need to measure your ribbing gauge, only your stockinette gauge. And let's just say you went down 1 size, so you went down to a US 5, then just go down 1 size for your ribbing, so go down to a US 2. Conversely, if you have to go up because you're a tight knitter and you go up to, say, a US 7 for your main body needle, then you would go up to a US 3 for the ribbing needle. Okay, so for casting on purposes, she calls for, I believe, a long tail cast on. Yes. Okay, so my favorite way of doing a long tail cast on is a little bit different. So I typically pull my skein of yarn or my cake of yarn from the outside. You can see here, pulling from the outside, but it's always hard to know exactly how much to pull off for your long tail. So you can remedy that by pulling a strand from the inside as well, or if you have a second ball, you could always just pull from 2 different balls. And then you're just going to make a slip knot with both ends. And you're not going to count that as a stitch because that will get pulled off before you join in the round. That just gets it on the needle for you. And then you're going to take your 2 ends and you're going to do your typical long tail cast on. There are lots of other tutorials out there to walk you through a long tail cast on. Very Pink Knits is one that we highly recommend here in the store, but hopefully you can kind of see how I've held my yarn. I do kind of grip the extra strands with my pinky. That's a bit optional, but you just go under, over, and back around. Try to do it slow so you can see this, but if this is too much for you or you're just not grasping a long tail cast on, you can also do a traditional knitted cast on as well. That is a great option for you. It truly does not matter as long as it's not something that's going to be very loose, like a backwards loop cast on, or just some people call that like a throw-on cast on. You just want something with a little bit of structure but still stretchy. So German twisted, if that's how you were taught, that's fabulous. Long tails, fabulous. You can do, like I said, a knitted cast on as well. Those are all great options. So I'm just going to take this off camera real quick and finish up, and I'll show you joining in the round. Okay, so I have cast on the number of stitches that I need, and of course I didn't run out of yarn because I'm attached to both the center and the outside. I am now just going to come and break that center, leaving my working yarn attached, which is my outside pull. And then put this off to the side. Just want to make sure my stitches aren't twisted. So you can see here my stitches are twisted, so we want to untwist that. And see how this line, this cast on ridge, is all facing the same way in the center, and it's not twisted or Mobius on itself. Now, remember that slip knot we did in the beginning? We're just going to pop that off and undo it. That doesn't count towards our total number of stitches. And now, what you're going to do to join is get your beginning of round marker. Grab mine, put that on, and just begin with your knit 1, purl 1 rib. Now, I do not do the cast on an extra stitch and pass it over. It's not necessary whatsoever. So as you can see here, you'd be like, oh, there's a gap. Yeah, there is, and that's perfectly fine. Once you've done a few rounds, you can always take this end and weave it back in over here, and that will close any gap that you might have. Don't let the gap bother you. It's gonna go away when you weave in your ends. It happens every time you're gonna join in the round for anything. Again, that goes away once you weave in your ends. So you can weave in your ends early, or you can wait to the end of the project. It's totally up to you. So now you're going to continue in what your pattern says, which is your knit 1, purl 1 rib all the way around for the length that you desire. And then you will switch out to your larger needles. So as you can see, I have mine on a 16-inch needle. That is what you want to start with. It will be more comfortable to knit if you start on the 16-inch, and then as you gradually add stitches with the raglan, then you can change to a longer cord so that they're not feeling bunched up. But it is best to start with a 16-inch so that your neck doesn't get stretched out. And then, like I said, you can just knit on, or if you have, so this is a fixed needle, so when I switch out, I will just knit on with my new larger needle, that first round where I'm placing my markers. you're going to be placing those markers for your raglans. So just like we did here, you will knit so many stitches, pop on a marker, knit so many stitches, pop on a marker. So once you do that, then we're going to be doing make one rights and make one lefts. I'm going to show you an example here. Just with a scrap piece of fabric. So this, here we go. So this is just a little mock-up with my stitch markers. So in this pattern we have our raglan stitch that's in between our markers. So in the pattern it's going to say knit to the first marker. So we're just going to do that real quick. Knit to the first marker. And when it says knit to the first marker, that doesn't mean knit to one stitch before. That does mean knit all the way up to the marker. Then it says to do a make one right. So what you want to do is bring this over top. So I always use my right hand needle to help, but you're doing it as though the left hand needle has come from behind, like so. So again, I just make it easier on myself and just use my right hand needle to pop that on, and then knit through the front loop. Yeah, without splitting your yarn, like so. And that is a make one right. Slip your marker, knit the raglan stitch, slip your marker again, and then do the make one left. So instead of coming from behind, you want to go from the front. So again, this bar in the middle, front to back, and then knit through the back of that stitch. So it can be pretty fiddly to try to just put your needle, especially if you're tight, through the back of that loop without splitting it. So what I like to do is kind of go in the front and just go over the top. Just a little helpful hint. And then you have your make one left. Then you're going to knit to the next marker. Again, all the way to that next marker. You're going to make one right. So again, that's coming from the back to the front. Knit into the front. Slip your marker. Knit the raglan stitch. Slip your marker again. Going from the front to the back and knit into the back of that stitch. And what that is doing is simply aligning your increases to where they look like they're coming out of the center raglan stitch rather than looking like they're like going in. So that is what that looks like. Now in your pattern you'll also be doing German short rows. We do have a separate video on German short rows, but just real quick, for example, you would be working flat when you do German short rows, so it's not always working in the round. So you would knit so many stitches past your marker, then you're going to simply turn, slip that first stitch and pull over tight to create the double stitch. You can go ahead and mark that, and then you're going to purl back across and just purl back to that beginning of round marker. Again, I recommend watching that video. Now, when you get to past the beginning of round marker, you're going to do a make one purlwise, which to do a make one right, you're going to do the same thing, except you're going to purl that stitch from the back, slip your marker, purl, and then purl from the front side on the other direction. Just makes them line up the same way. Purl Soho has great written out instructions for both the make one left, make one right, and the purl make one left and right. but then you'll start seeing your raglan increases here. And I'm going to show you on the garment itself what that's going to look like. So this is my center raglan stitch going down the seam of the raglan, and my increases are moving out from there. You can also see the German short rows. What they do is so that when the garment lays flat, it is higher in the back. Make sure this is centered here. Higher in the back than it is in the front. So you can see here, we work basically more rows on the back, and then we're working to either side gradually, so these stitches kind of seem to dead end into that ribbing, and that's these short rows that you're doing that raise up the neck of the back. It just makes the garment sit better on your shoulders and on the back of the neck as well. It also keeps this crew neck from riding up and getting too close to your throat, which is uncomfortable for most people. So once you have done your German short rows, then you're just going to be doing the raglan increases along those raglan markers a certain amount of times depending on the size that you're knitting. And you're going to see them all line up here, and then eventually you're going to be putting your stitches on hold. So the next video we're going to go over putting these stitches on hold, joining the sweater in the round to get to this point here. And yeah, so stay tuned, and hopefully this video has been helpful for you. Like I said, please refer to our German short row videos for a more in-depth tutorial on doing German short rows. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we will be happy to help. Have a great rest of your day, and happy sweater knitting.